I'm Jim Check. Thank you for watching Kelowna Now. I'm here with me on the line is Ian Burns, our managing editor, all the way out there in Ottawa. Looks like a nicer day in Kelowna. How's it looking in Ottawa for you, our nation's capital? Are you there, Ian? Ian.
Can you hear me now?
Yeah, we can hear you now. So there you go. How
I was
are
in the green
things?
room.
Uh, you can probably
It's
turn them
snowy
down.
still. Very, very snowy.
There you go. Nicer here then. There you go.
Yeah,
Um,
usually is.
I just want to start off with we love the feedback when people actually give us feedback, and I just wanted to let you know. Somebody sent in they love the way you do the weather every morning because you have a fun and funny way to do it. So there you go. You got some nice kudos from Michael.
It's probably the best compliment I've ever had in my journalism career, I would say. So thanks for that.
Now you're just being a little funny, right? But yeah, we'll probably get some
That's what
great
he
comments.
likes.
We'll get some great comments today and some not so great comments because we have our TikTok comments live as well as our YouTube comments live, and we'll react to some of them as we move along here. We went through. We'll talk a little bit about the tariff turmoil as we move along here, but we just wanted to show you this. The next leader of the Canadian Liberal Party, Polymarkets, is a betting market, and it's clearly showing that Mark Carney is the new leader of the Liberal Party, and with Chrystia Freeland with about a 5% chance, and the other ones don't even really rank. You know, Karina Gold and Gould, I think it is, and then Ruby Dalla. So according to the
Melanie
Polymarkets, it's a
Jolie
done
there
deal.
for some reason.
Melanie Jolie's in there somewhere, and Dominic LeBlanc, right? I think this is when they first started, right? So a 93% chance for Carney. This was like a 5.5% chance for Chrystia Freeland. And yeah, so the betting market's very decided, and they were pretty good, the betting markets, when we even went to the federal election. I mean, the U.S. election. They had basically picked Trump as the favorite. And
Yeah, and they were not for the first time more accurate than a lot
the
of
polls.
pollsters.
Yeah, so there you go.
Yeah,
If you're looking for polls, you can head to the Poly Markets, and they do have the Conservatives winning the election. I think it's about an 85% chance or something like that. You can go on Poly Markets and you can see all that stuff there. There's quite a few things
interesting.
on the Poly Markets there. You can bet
Funny
on
you should
anything.
mention though. You mentioned the federal election and the Conservatives. Another poll has just come out. We saw that ECOS one, didn't we?
Yeah,
That showed the Liberals looking a lot stronger. A Main Street poll has just come out today and also shows the Liberals considerably ahead in Ontario, which is obviously the most important place for to win because it has the most seats. So I mean, that seems like another disparity is emerging there between the betting markets and certain pollsters.
interesting for sure, right? Because yeah, Karina Gold, she sent out another email this morning. I got it in my thing, and she's got like a 5-point plan right now that the tariffs have been kind of like at least we have a 30-day grace period, and her plan is develop a major Team Canada charm offensive. I'm not sure what that means.
She's
Includes
obviously confident in her own charm, so she wants to deploy that around the world.
and that includes trade missions in each sector across the United States. I'm not
Hmm.
sure if all the rhetoric that we've been saying is equal to some of the charm that, and develop an advertising campaign that speaks to everyday Americans about the value of the relationship, keep up the momentum amongst provinces, knock down. And I think that's like that should be done. Like somebody should pick out a pen and sign some deals here.
So
Help
this,
Canadian
sorry,
business.
just to interrupt you a second. Is this you copied and pasted this from your email?
Yeah, it's her.
So they've obviously misspelled the word who's there.
Yeah,
If you look at Amazon delivery
yeah, I
drivers,
did see that. Yeah,
who's. So I
who's
mean,
fleet?
I'm sorry. Almost at this point, it's like, how can I now go along? You've broken the spell. The fourth wall has been crashed down because you can't spell. So straight away, it's like, I don't know. How can I listen to her anymore?
Yeah, and then Mark Carney's, it was just like dear first name. Actually, it didn't even have the salutation. It just said first name.
Yeah, get over here, first name.
I'm assuming that was me. And then I'll say help help Canadian businesses access new markets. Again, where were we doing that for the past 10 years? Not sure. We need pipelines and things to access these other markets. I'm not sure if they're going to how they're going to get our energy, because that's our biggest export is our energy and our mines and minerals and that. So there has to be a way for them to get somewhere. You just can't sign a deal and, you know.
Yeah, but you
Yeah.
might have to upset some hippies in Montreal if that's what you want to do. And nobody wants to upset hippies in Montreal.
And then this last one, be bold in making Canada the best country in the world and to start and grow a business. I mean, it's been nothing, especially in British Columbia, nothing but an anti-business environment. So there's that. Our friend Ruby Dalla, at least she's good for a laugh. If you're happy with Carney or Trudeau, you'll be happy with Carney. She's definitely, she's the only one really kind of like throwing the darts, it seems like. Although I've seen Chrystia Freeland throw a dart there recently at Carney. But
Well, Freeland's darts are kind of like they're subtle, aren't they? And they're
uh,
very like they're very much it's like an in-group dart where it's kind of like they speak the same metaphors, don't they? And it's very subtle. Whereas obviously this Ruby character is a complete and utter outsider. So she's just like, any dart will do, really. She's just
she's
she'll just attack all day long.
she's definitely the if they want to talk about an outsider, she would be the one true outsider, if in their definition of
Yeah,
outsider.
absolutely. Yeah.
Because I'm sure they're not even picking up. Nobody, no media is calling like her or anything. That's for sure.
Oh,
Um,
she's saying no, perhaps. I don't know.
we've tried. And then this is that from a Global Mail journalist that a near trade war should shock Canada out of our stupor. Whatever happens, there can be no going back to normal, and that's what we should hope for, right? Because the wealth, Canada's wealth, is located beneath our feet, and that's our natural wealth is our energy, and our mines and minerals and all that stuff, and our agriculture and our forestry and all that stuff, and we've done nothing but we talked about it yesterday, but stymie this access to other markets. Hopefully, this is a wake-up call for Canada and Canadians, that they make sure that they vote for a politician that's going to actually tap our wealth. Yesterday, Donald Trump actually signed an executive order starting a sovereign wealth fund in the United States, similar to what Norway has, and we talked about that yesterday. Norway's sovereign wealth fund. Would you say yesterday about 361,000 per person? That's in the sovereign wealth fund that they use for their
Yeah,
citizens.
a little over that. Yeah, a little over 300. I think it's like 320 or something. Yeah.
And Canada could have the same type of thing, yet we don't.
Indeed. Well, Alberta has what it calls I can't remember what its name is, but it's sort of like demotic name is the Rainy Day Fund. And that
Yeah,
is
they do.
basically just a sovereign wealth fund.
They do have that, and they have distributed some of those monies to Albertans in the past. My daughter was there, and she was getting checks, and so they were paying dividends to their residents.
Yeah, well, they pay a lot of dividends to the rest of Canada as well, I guess you might argue.
You might argue, they might argue that for sure. And then still, throughout all this, uh, there's this bring back Parliament, Canada first, and yet like we've been told by LeBlanc that we don't need Parliament sitting, and we've been told by Trudeau, like he kind of like just skirts the question. It seems odd in like one of our most dire economic moments that we don't allow our elected MPs that we're paying them a lot, to actually discuss a better plan forward.
Yeah, I mean yesterday, all before this deal, before this, not it's not a deal, but you know what I mean, before this like 30-day reprieve
Reprieve,
was
yeah.
granted by Emperor Trump, it seemed to me like it was inevitable that Parliament would be recalled. But now with this reprieve, I think the odds have just collapsed, and I think at the moment it looks like it really isn't going to be recalled anytime soon, at least not within this window, because they're just going to say, "Oh no, we can't do that. We're too busy doing the executive arm work. We can't go and be legislative as well. It's too much of a distraction or something along those lines."
Yeah, I mean, they'll come up with every excuse they can, and we've seen that, but it's something that should be remembered by the voters.
Well, you would think so. I don't know how much it's cutting through, though, because I think the reality is that most people are so sick of Parliament anyway that they don't really care whether it sits or not. You know, they're sick of politicians. So I think maybe it's a bit of an abstract point for a lot of people. But I mean, if something really needs to be done, like a bill passed or something like that, then I think it would cut through to most people.
Yeah. So, I mean, there was a lot of talk about how we need to get our, like even from the liberals and that, and talking about how we need to tap our natural resources. And then here we have a reprieve, and then they're asked about the Energy East pipeline. They asked Premier Legault from Quebec, and then we're going to play his response.
If during your discussions today the issues of pipelines came up and whether Quebec would now support either an Energy East or some other kind of pipeline that would take Alberta oil out to markets other than the US.
Yeah. Of course, right now, there's no social acceptability for this kind of project right now in Quebec. But, of course, situation, the economy, and what Mr. Trump is doing may change the situation in the future. So if there's a social acceptability, we will be open to these kind of projects. But right now, there's no social acceptability, no.
So there you go. Lots of talk about how we need to have, pipelines, and then we get a reprieve, and the answer is no.
I mean, it's that's almost like too painful to even discuss, isn't it? It is just agony having to deal with Quebec, frankly. I mean, we might as well just like slap it on the table straight away. It is just such a painful relationship. And the same is true, we should also say, with British Columbia. It just the pain never goes away, really, does it? And you have these two provinces which are like all important, really, aren't they? Because they have access to the world. One's the Atlantic, one's the Pacific, and they're both hostile to just everything, pretty much. Everything that might grow Canada and grow Canada's economy. And it's just, and I say, sorry, we say those provinces, that's not quite right, is it? It's like, it's Montreal and it's Vancouver, really. It's urban people, it's urbanites that do this. And I just, what do you say? I don't know. I'm almost like lost for words that they can still be so um ridiculous, and they can still choose to stare at their own navel rather than try and actually get out of a crisis.
Yeah, it's like during the crisis, I never let a good crisis go to waste, right? To get all that virtue signaling out there and everything, but when it comes time to doing things, then that's a different thing.
Yep. And I mean, we saw this as well with the other major block on big projects in Canada, which is First Nations. We saw that where when it was like full on emergency time, it was panic stations for everyone. A very important figure in British Columbia came out and said, "Yep, we did oppose the Northern Gateway pipeline, but look at what Trump's doing. This guy's nuts. Like we have to do it now." And he had a lot of conviction. And then a couple of days later, he's like, "Oh no, actually, I've changed my mind. Like, no way. There's no way we're going to build that." I just like, what can you do in this situation? It's like these shackles that Canada has around its limbs are just sometimes they feel like they can't be defeated. They can't be pushed aside. It's just a doom spiral.
Yeah, we definitely don't have a Canada first mentality. It's definitely what's in sometimes like personal best interest. And then speaking about a different interest, the climate agenda that has been suppressing our natural resources for the past 10 years by the Liberal Party. We have Mark Carney, which is odd that he's speaking on CNN, actually, like representing Canada, which is odd because he hasn't had a single vote yet, and he's there talking like he's the Prime Minister of Canada. And we're going to play this clip here.
President Trump keeps bringing up the idea of Canada becoming the 51st state of the United States. Listen to what Prime Minister Trudeau told me on this show last month about that notion.
Canadians are incredibly proud of being Canadian. One of the ways we define ourselves most easily is, well, we're not American. There is such a depth of pride that that's not actually an issue.
Kind of a curious answer. I don't define myself as not being Phil Mattingly. How do you define being Canadian, and what did you make of Trudeau's comment?
Well, I think there's many differences between our two great nations. One of them is that Canada's a mosaic, the U.S. is a melting pot. Canada puts greater weight on social services, on healthcare, protecting each other. Canada has different ties. We have deep, deep ties with the United Kingdom through the Commonwealth. We have deep ties through Europe. We have a different approach to international relations. We're not the superpower. We're looking to support it. So we are quite different. But look, we love America. We love Americans. This is, as I say, one of the greatest relationships in the world. We want it to continue, but if it's changing, we too will change. And I would say, if I can, Jake, I would say the mood of the country has moved from one of confusion to a sense of betrayal, and now very much to a sense of resolve. And the resolve from Canadians is if the U.S. has changed, if it's changed its priorities, how the U.S. is going to treat us, we'll move forward on our own.
A couple of things come to mind when the Trudeau clip there, like Justin, I don't know if he engages the repercussions of what he says there. What defines a Canadian is that we're not an American. Like that's how you insult people. even Jake Tapper picked that up, right? Do you know what I mean? Like, how do you define yourself? Well, I'm not you, right? Like, wow.
But another way that can be seen as an insult, it's almost like asking someone who isn't Canadian, like, all right, who doesn't like Canadians, and say, all right, define a Canadian. They'd say, oh, they're just not Americans. You know, that's almost like that's an insult from a third party as well.
It's like the biggest insult out there, really. And then Mark Carney is saying, I get the ties to the UK, but I don't know what ties we have to Europe over the Americans.
Well, he's a European, isn't he?
I get his tie.
The foremost prince of Canada, therefore. We have ties.
I understand his ties to Europe, but I don't understand Canada's ties to Europe.
I mean, it's a struggle to think. I mean, there's a strong Irish link, obviously. Lots of history of Irish people in Canada.
But comparatively to
France.
Comparatively to the Americans, are ties stronger to the European than it is to the United States, like our largest trading partner?
Yeah, I think what he was trying to get at there was that we share a lot more in common with the European powers when it comes to liberalism and kind of internationalism and things like that, and very friendly with each other at the UN and like various NGOs that operate around the world.
Globalism and the climate agenda, the Paris Accord, and all that stuff.
Climate change as well, yeah.
That's how we find ourselves here with no access to outside markets because we've suppressed our natural resources for the past 10 years.
But it's a very interesting point that Carney, you know, he's going to have to answer it at some point because he's going to be the Prime Minister quite soon for however long that lasts. Well, I should say it looks like he's going to be the Prime Minister very soon. He's going to have to ask that question. You know, he's all about the strength of Canada's resources and the strength of Canada's economy standing on its own and providing other countries around the world with what they need from us, which is only really natural resources. There's nothing else that they want or need. He needs to answer the question, what is he going to do about the obstacles to getting those resources out there, namely British Columbia, Quebec, and certain First Nations that don't want to cooperate? What's his answer? That's the question. That's the most sensitive question.
I think what people need to do is go to Mark Carney's website and read the website. The only platform piece on there right now, it's entitled Climate. And if you go through you go way to the bottom and you'll see a little thing that says read full press release, and you'll find that link. And if you go to that link and it talks about mandating companies into the climate agenda, because all the big banks, including RBC the other day, have pulled out. All the big U.S. banks have pulled out that net zero alliance that he chaired, and now all the big Canadian banks have pulled out. So his solution to that is just to mandate them back in. Liberals like that word, mandate. Mandate's a good
Yeah,
word
it's
for them.
not a very popular word in the rest of Canada, though. I wouldn't say outside of the Liberal Party.
Speaking of mandates, I pulled this tweet here, and I don't know if you know much about it, but that says they're back in court fighting the Trudeau government's appeal of the federal court ruling of the use of the Emergencies Act on the Freedom Convoy as illegal and unconstitutional. Have you followed that at all?
I haven't followed that, no, but that is they've been saying this kind of thing, haven't they, all along, that they were going to keep challenging it. So yeah, I mean, don't know how much luck they're going to have. I think it's been proved in court, or at least ruled by judges, that it was it was a legitimate use of the Emergencies Act, even though it was extra constitutional in certain ways. But I don't know. I don't know how they're expecting to get a different judgment.
I'm not sure either. But lots of mandates at that time, including dipping into people's bank accounts, right? Freezing them.
Yeah, but all of that it's all been perused and judged by I actually can't remember which court it was now, but I feel like it might have been the Supreme Court that looked at that.
And CP story is saying that Trump was wrong. U.S. banks can and do operate in Canada.
Yeah, and $115 billion of assets apparently. But I mean, the reality, this is what we said straight away. I can't remember if we were actually broadcasting live to our gigantic audience at the time, but we had this conversation, didn't we? Which is, the Canadian financial sector is very heavily regulated.
Mm-hmm.
Everybody knows that, surely. I mean, I certainly know that. Somebody that had to sort of enter this the financial landscape as a bit of an outsider, well, as a complete outsider. When I went to get my first bank account, and they explained to me that I was going to be charged money, a fee to have a bank account, and I was kind of like, in England, it's nothing like that. It's actually sometimes the other way around. They incentivize you to the max to have a bank account. And I came here, and then that was the beginning of my odyssey to learn about the Canadian financial system and how stringently regulated it is. But obviously, a lot of Canadians, and certainly a lot of people in power, are very, very proud of that fact, because Canadian banks are, next to like Swiss banks and some other banks in Europe, are considered to be the most stable banks in the world, the strongest, steadiest banks in the world. So, and that isn't true of American banks, obviously, because where they like to do wild gambles and lots of stupid things like the I can't even remember the name of it now, but the credit crunch malarkey, where
Yeah,
the subprime scandal.
yeah, they love to play with financial instruments down there for sure. And that is one of the things. The Canadian banks are more stable in that way, but you're right, they do charge fees for the most part. But there are banks coming into Canada, like new type of things like Wealthsimple, which is an app developed bank, which is, I think, I recommend to lots of young people to use, because you can do trading on there for zero commissions, and you can buy fractional shares. So instead of buying that Starbucks coffee for $8, you can buy a fractional share in McDonald's or whatever you want to buy it in, whether that's, like shares in Lululemon or Aritzia or Tesla or Microsoft or whatever, or Apple. You can buy a fractional share, which is not available in most Canadian banks.
Yeah, or they charge you. I mean,
Yeah.
Scotiabank has something like that, but they charge you pretty
Yeah, they usually
pretty
charge
hefty
like
fees.
a small, like even if it's $8, if you buy, like you say, instead of buying that cup of coffee for $8, you buy a share for $8. They'll charge you $8 in and $8 out, so the stock has to triple before you break even. But with Wealthsimple, we don't get any money from Wealthsimple. I mean, it'd be great if they would send us some. You buy the share at $8, and next day it goes up to $9. You sell it, you get the dollar, right? So it is a really great way for young people to start investing if they don't have a lot of capital. It's different if you're buying tens of thousands of dollars worth of a stock. The $8 commission is not that big of a deal, right? Because it gets spread out over all the shares that you bought. But when it's over a fractional share, it's huge.
And you can link it to TFSA as well, can't you?
Yeah,
So
you can put a TFSA in
shield
there,
it.
and you can even buy the Bitcoin in there, the dreaded Bitcoin. Doug Ford, another one that needs to engage his brain before he speaks. He tends to say a lot of things and then regret them later, and he's on a hot mic there. I'll let you run with that one. How's that?
Well, he uses quite naughty language, our boy Doug here, so we can't quote him exactly. But he said that, to paraphrase, he said he was actually really happy that Trump won at the time, when the results came out last year, and he was pleased because he thought that it might bring about some really good changes in the US. And I guess that kind of makes sense. He must have thought he's pro-business. Doug Ford is pro-business, so he thought, right, great, like we can do business or something. But then he said, in his words, then the guy pulled out the knife and effing yanked it in me. And then he said something else quite rude after that. But no, he's sort of expressing just how betrayed he feels. And he also said, like, I'm not going to have anything to do with him anymore, basically. And he's a disaster, and he's like completely changed his mind on
Well,
Trump. And I think
let's
that's
wait
kind
for
of,
next
I mean,
week.
that. Sorry, what's that?
Let's wait till next week and see what he has to say, right?
Well, maybe, but I think I don't know. This is being like immediately the opposition in Ontario because they're having it's election right now. It's
Yeah.
the writs dropped, so they're actually it's quite a sensitive time to be caught saying something like this. But immediately the Liberals, the Ontario Liberals, have come out and said, they've done a video and everything, and they're like really trying to capitalize on this. They're really trying to make it seem like he's done something extremely bad. But I'm not sure. I think a lot of people might actually respect the authenticity because there are many, many people around the world, but in Canada, who are just kind of like axiomatically, like instinctively hostile to Donald Trump. And sometimes they can't even really explain why they are so hostile to Trump. And it all seems a little bit sort of performative, to use a favored
Yeah,
word of
I
certain
was just
people.
going to say that. I think he's kind of using that moment to kind of like puff up his chest and say how, like kind of a populist kind of move there.
Yeah, but it also he's saying like, look, I gave him the time of day. I wasn't just one of these like they call it the Trump derangement syndrome, don't they? Some certain people. He's like, I wasn't affected by that. I wasn't just like swept up in this hysteria. Like I judged him on his own merits, and now he's done this, and now I'm judging him again, and I think he's despicable. So I think a lot of people might sort of respect that independence of mind if that's what it is, if it's not just all a big show, which it could also be, since politics is so phony.
Yeah. Now that Trump has moved his attention to China, and China's countered it because he levied a 10% tariff on China, which is odd. But why only 10? And I think Pierre Poilievre brought that up. Why only 10 with China and 25 with Canada and Mexico? And then China has countered Trump's tariffs, and also wants to
In
open an investigation
retrospect,
in Google, right?
In retrospect, though, that question, why 25 for Mexico and Canada and 10 for China? I mean, it could be quite easy to make the argument that the reason it was like that is because he intended all along to actually impose this tariff on China and to not impose it on Canada and Mexico. If
Mm-hmm.
that's the case, then that makes sense, doesn't it? Because
Yeah.
the US-China trading relationship is gigantic, absolutely immense. And to put 25% tariff on Chinese goods out of the blue like that would cause
And I
like real inflation in the US.
and I would also counter by saying that I think uh, China is, like arguably one of the largest, well, could be measured as the largest economy in the world as well, depending on who you listen to. But it is one of the world's largest economies. And when you're a bully and you realize that the person you're bully also has a lot of strength, and they're trying to form that BRICS nation, maybe you kind of like more kid gloves, whereas you think you can take advantage of Canada and Mexico a lot easier because of their like position in the world trade.
Yeah. But this is like a really, really old beef that
Mm-hmm.
with China that goes back at least to when they joined the World Trade Organization, which was 2001, I think, wasn't it? Because the Chinese they've been welcomed into the world of trading nations, but they've never like ever even attempted to pretend to obey by the rules of trade. They manipulate their currency. They sponsor companies. Like they support them with state funds to the extreme so that they can beat their rivals. They dump stuff like commodities onto the world market so that to advantage themselves. They steal intellectual property. They've never once played by the rules. And the Americans obviously have shored up this global trading system since the end of the Second World War. in part with the U.S. Navy that patrols shipping lanes to make sure that they're safe. And the Americans, this is one of the points that Trump makes that I think a lot of people actually agree with. Like the Americans have, in a way, been taken advantage of by the Chinese, and they're extremely upset about it. So I don't know. This is like a historic argument. This one.
Yeah. We talk about mandates. Purelator lost the COVID-19 vaccine mandate case in BC Supreme Court. And that's for employees that were fired or suspended because they weren't vaccinated against COVID-19.
Yeah. Well, the an arbitrator was brought in because I think it was a Teamsters union brought this brought a number of cases, I think, against Purelator because of the firings and suspensions. Um, they had argued that it wasn't reasonable to have a vaccine mandate in place after the date of June 30th, 2022, because after that point it became impossible to argue, based on the evidence, that the vaccine or any of the COVID vaccines could prevent the spread of the virus, because that was the rationale for the vaccine mandate. It was, you have to get this because it's going to stop the spread, and if you don't get it, you're going to come in and you're going to spread this horrible disease, and everybody's going to suffer as a consequence. But then the evidence started to show that as most of us can remember, I'm sure, the evidence pretty quickly started to show that that was nonsense. That was completely false, completely
So
untrue.
where does the BC government fall in these mandates? Because theirs were past the June 30th, 2022 deadline. Let's hear it.
Interesting question. Yeah, I'm not completely up on the latest.
Yeah, you know what I mean?
I
Like
know that.
they ran pretty late with theirs, right? I mean, they just pulled them,
Yeah.
what, a year ago?
Well, this is sub judice at the moment, isn't it? Because the people involved, the two sort of main plaintiffs, the two groups that are suing the BC government, have been given they've finally been given a date, haven't they, to see if they can have their class action suit certified. That's going to happen in the spring. So, this is still being figured out in the courts, I guess.
This decision must give them hope because, I mean, this is the Supreme Court of BC, right?
Definitely, yeah. This must be manna from heaven for them. This must be great news because this is one of, because we chatted to the lawyer, didn't we? It was the two of us chatted to him, who represents both of those suits, who they now merge together. They're kind of allying together to sue the government, and this was one of his points, and it is in. I'm fairly sure it's in the final document that they submitted. So you would think that precedent suggests, yeah, that they would succeed on this side.
Marco Rubio out there touring the world already, making deals. One thing for sure you can say is like, even though he's breaking a lot of eggs on the way and like trashing a lot of his old friends, Donald Trump is making things happen in the world. And I would say that in all the stuff that the turmoil he's caused Canada and Mexico, the border was one of the things that he ran on, and people would argue that the border has been kind of a disaster for the past 4 years. Even denying that the border was wide open. If anything, out of this, he's got action from Mexico. They put 10,000 troops at the border. He's got U.S. military at the border, helping their border agents, and he's got now Canada deploying close to $1.5 billion, including hiring a border czar to patrol our northern border, or our southern border, their northern border. So he has achieved some attention for the border, which has been, like highlighted as one of the disasters for the United States in the past 4 years.
Yeah, and he got all that at the very, very low bargain basement price of alienating America's long-standing allies, spitting in the face of its best friend in history. What a good deal that was, Donald.
Yeah, good deal for him. Not such a great deal for Canada. I mean, it's upset a lot of Canadians for sure. And
I would say not a good deal for America or the American people either, or the Western alliance, but a good deal for China. And I'm sure it really, really gratified the Chinese to see the American president spit in the face of America's best allies and best friends.
Marco Rubio, back to Marco Rubio, says like they got a deal there that El Salvador is willing to take violent Americans for their super
This is
jails down there.
obviously this is obviously unconstitutional, I would say. There's absolutely no chance of this ever happening. The Supreme Court, I imagine, would smack that down instantly. To send off American citizens to a foreign country to serve jail time, it doesn't seem possible, that does it? But I don't know. We do live in interesting times. But I mean, Bukele here, he's the guy who's in charge of El Salvador. He's considered to be like a hero for a lot of people on the right in America and around the world because he took El Salvador, which it was very
Yeah.
recently the most violent country in the world. It was I actually know someone, I actually have a friend from El Salvador who grew up there and told me about how terrifying it was to be there and how now it almost feels like, Canada or something. It's like the
Yeah,
transformation has been enormous, but he did that through real, extraordinary powers. He basically declared a national emergency and threw loads of people in prison
yeah, they got this super
and
jail down there,
smashed the gangs.
mega jail
Yeah,
down
mega
there that
jail.
probably that a lot of people would be scared to go into. Kind of like like you remember the stories of like Thailand jails and stuff like that. Like a hole in the ground. I don't know what their jails are like, but
Or
like,
Turkish jails. There's that film about that, isn't there?
um,
Midnight
but
Express.
I don't know what kind of deal they cut that they're, like you said, the deportees is one thing, but also including violent Americans, like offloading American citizens into jails, like you said, that will likely face a few court challenges.
Well, Bukele said that it's about, from his side, it's about money. I mean, that's one reason. It's also about winning the favor of the United States, which is a huge bonus for these little countries in
Yeah.
Central and South America. If they win America as a friend and they do it right, they don't expose themselves too much, then it can be an enormous advantage, an enormous benefit.
And
And
I
I think
believe
that's what he's trying to do.
El Salvador, we're going to get to the markets here, is one of the first countries in the world to have Bitcoin as a reserve currency as well.
Yeah, he's also like tried to attract the work from home people to come to El Salvador, I believe, and I think they offer some sort of special tax arrangement for people. I mean, he's a modern figure. He's a figure of the 21st century, Bukele. He's an interesting guy, and I think he's quite young actually. So it is an intriguing little relationship, but I can imagine the Americans, because obviously the Americans they do have quite a lot of people in their jails who are foreigners and they're not US citizens. They're just, yeah, like they might have been permanent residents or something like that. They might have been immigrants of some kind. And those people, I imagine the US would really want to get rid of because then there wouldn't be the same kind of constitutional challenge based on citizenship. So if Bekele is willing to take them, this is the kind of thing, if you look at other countries like Britain, they tried to do a deal not too dissimilar to this with Rwanda, and that was a failure. But they tried to come up with this deal where they would send like illegal immigrants, people that they didn't want, to Rwanda to process them, and that was a way around the legal system in England. And the Italians have also done something like that. I think they've done it with Libya or some country like that. So this is obviously becoming a trend for Western countries to like have an alliance with a country, in Latin America, Africa, or something, and send your undesirables to that country so they can deal with them.
Well, wasn't Australia one of those for the United Kingdom way back in the day?
Yeah, and it's interesting you mentioned Australia because Australia, in many ways, did pioneer this with Papua New Guinea, where because they had this promise, like people were coming up from Indonesia on rafts. Actually, I think they were coming from other countries as well. Like they were coming like pretty long distances, and they were like landing on Australian territory and then claiming asylum, saying can't get rid of me. And it was a big issue for the Aussies, and they set up a processing facility on PNG. And I think that probably is the pioneer, actually. I think the Australians pioneered this whole thing. And the Australian government said there are these big signs where it's like, if you arrive on a boat or if you arrive illegally, there is zero chance that you'll stay in Australia. And they kind of like overcame that problem. And this is relevant to us because obviously it's happening in Canada too. there are people that arrive in Canada from the US, so that, I mean, that's supposed to be fixed now with the deal that we made with the Americans. But people arrive in Canada and then they don't want to leave, you know? They claim asylum and on often spurious grounds, and they say they don't want to leave. And the very fact that the law is such that they don't have to leave, really. They can pretty much stay. It's pretty much a guarantee. So as a consequence of that, maybe Canada's going to have to come up with a deal like this at some point.
Well, let's talk about markets. Gold up again this morning. I think right now that chart's like probably from like 30 minutes ago. Gold is even higher at the current moment. Gold is currently trading at in the U.S. dollars 28.41. This was showing 28.33, so that's like like $10,000 Canadian. I'm joking, but not by much, I guess. Like I think.
Maybe if we didn't get reprieve, then yeah.
The Canadian dollar did bounce. We'll talk about that in a second. But in Canadian dollars, it is 4075. So there you go. And Bitcoin, Rommel's ahead of us there. Bitcoin playing with that $100,000 mark again. It had sold off again with these trade wars. Bitcoin didn't like that uncertainty, but it's kind of like hanging, and like it's hanging onto that that $100,000 mark there too. But again, lots of wind in its sails overall, though, with favorable U.S. administration. Other countries starting to adopt it. Even our own Vancouver, the mayor wants to make Vancouver the Bitcoin capital of Canada. So, and there was a time that Pierre Poilievre talked a lot about Bitcoin. He hasn't talked about it lately, and then it fell dramatically. And then Justin Trudeau made a lot of fun of him for Bitcoin. But if he brought that conversation up again, it definitely would be in Pierre Poilievre's, because I think it's doubled from their benefit to say, because I think Trudeau was saying that if you invested in Bitcoin, you would have lost like half your money or something. Now you would have more than doubled your money.
Now it's the case that if you'd invested in Canadian dollars, you would have lost a lot of your money.
Yeah,
That's the way it is now.
Let's look at the Canadian dollar chart. And you can see that big spike downwards was as the Trump tariffs were starting to come into effect. And again, the markets got word first because the dollar reacted prior to the deal being announced, because the dollar was already reacting positively upwards. I don't know how that pipeline gets out there, but the dollar knows more than you.
I guess it was based on the Mexican deal. Like they just assumed that it was going to go to that the Canadians were going to be given that too.
You and I talked about it for several days leading up to it, that a lot of these things, the posturing is like almost like a union negotiation thing, where it goes to the 11th hour, and like the person in the power to make the deal, because the Americans had the power all along, right? There's no doubt about it, to make the deal. Yeah. It was Canada coming up with like, hey, well, how about this? How about this? How about this? And and he probably dragged them on to the 11th hour to get maximum capitulation from the Canadian government.
But then you have to wonder what exactly it is that they capitulated on, because the package that supposedly appeased Trump is substantially, basically the same one that was announced in December, after back when Trump had only ever like tweeted about this nonsense rather than actually going all in. I mean, the only big difference, there's people are talking about this fentanyl czar thing. I think that's just stupid, waste of time. But the designation of cartels as terrorist organizations, that's a pretty big deal. I mean, I guess that seems to me that was probably the sticking point, because that's the biggest announcement that's been made.
I do think the other one is there like a joint like task force, where I think the Americans would likely say joint, meaning we're in charge.
Oh yeah, that's how it works.
Do you know what I mean? I think that was the big win. Just basically, we'll run your military from this side of the border, right?
But he already, Trudeau already offered that in December, so that wasn't a new thing. The only two new things that I could see, that I could pick up on, were fentanyl czar. I wish people would stop using that word czar. It's so stupid, but some sort of fentanyl honcho of some kind, and then this designation of cartels as terrorist groups, which is really hard. That's kind of, when you read about it, you kind of understand a little bit why they haven't done that, even though they're obviously terrorist organizations, like by by almost any definition. They perform terrorist acts like murdering politicians and so on. But I mean, the reason it's hard is a similar reason it was hard to do it with the Iranian Republican Guard, because it's actually like the Republican Guard in Iran. They're like businesses as well, you know. They have their tentacles and everything, and the same is true of the cartels. So I think it was just logistically hard to do that. So probably that was the obstacle. That's my instinct anyway, and kind of just had to say whatever. Okay, we'll do it, my lord.
Talking about AI a little bit. Palantir stock soars 27% to an all-time high, becoming a $200 billion company. And that up on earnings, like huge jump. And Palantir is a AI-based military contractor and a very vocal CEO as well, a strong supporter of Donald Trump as well. But this, I mean, I started following this company when it was a $23 share, and everybody said it was worthless and useless to buy and stuff like that. And AI in the military is becoming a bigger and bigger thing. And don't forget Donald Trump started Space Force, like in his last administration, and Space Force is probably likely to become a bigger thing. But this AI thing is becoming a bigger component of especially the U.S. military now. So huge jump this morning, huge jump on Palantir. So
Bigger than McDonald's now.
Yeah, so but Palantir, most of the targets for Palantir were in the $80 to $90 range. So a lot of the analysts are adjusting their targets a lot higher. So there you go. It's becoming like the 47th mega cap publicly traded American company. And we got a stock chart here to show you the jump here. And this is a yearly chart. See, it's kind of like dead money, kind of like a lull along here for the first 6 months of the year. Remember, that's when I started following it. In the $20, $25 range, right? And not much was happening. And a lot of these things really make dramatic moves, right? It just kind of like coils upward. You can see today, like that $105 mark way up there, a huge spike this morning based on earnings. And we're seeing that, saw the same thing with NVIDIA and some of these other companies too.
The
AI
split looks to me like, or the second split is the election, isn't it? November 4th, you can see.
Yeah, and that is like that spike too, because a lot of like the stock market reacted very favorable to Trump election, and one of the commenters on our TikTok here is saying that like the markets reacted negatively to these tariffs because it would be bad for all the economies, Mexico, Canada, and the U.S., and really bad for the consumers, like really bad, and the markets were selling off based on that. And like one of the comments is that Donald Trump loves the markets and he loves to see the markets go higher. And he does, and he's always wanted the markets to go higher. So did that play a role? Likely. But in Canada, there's a lot of talk that the Bank of Canada's hand is forced now to cut rates even more dramatically than before with these tariffs hanging over our head to kind of move our economy forward, because we are stagnant right now. We are definitely, like, our GDP fell in the last report, right? So. Definitely our economy needs to be juiced, but there's that balancing act with weakening our dollar every time we cut rates as well.
Yeah, especially when the Americans aren't really budging with their Federal Reserve rate.
Yeah, that's for sure. My phone won't stop ringing. There you go. And our next one, AI enters nuclear defense.
It's Peter Thiel. He doesn't like the way you're chatting about Palantir.
No.
Forget him.
Yeah. There you go. And then in our EV section, Cybertruck. They dropped the Foundation Series price in Canada, and now you can buy a Cybertruck and put up the next image there for $117,000 versus the $137,000. So if you were waiting for that Cybertruck deal, there's your deal. $117,873 for an all-wheel drive Cybertruck.
Cheap as chips.
Cheap as chips. And then and another one, Norway nearly 100% of all electric cars. And we talked about Norway recently, but they still make scads of money off of oil and gas, and they have that in their sovereign wealth fund. But most people in Norway are buying electric cars.
And most of their grid is powered by waterfalls and rivers. They have hydropower. So they're
Yeah.
like, they are kind of like an analog in a way to Canada. They're quite similar to Canada
Hmm.
in that sense. But I mean, it's a smaller country and it's kind of they're very shrewd, the Norwegians. Like, they're not in the European Union either. Like they're quite clever and they play their own game and they don't really let anybody else kind of bully them or guide them or whatever. And they've been really, really smart because when they found that North Sea oil, what was that, the 1960s or something like that, when they realized it was actually viable, it benefited a number of countries, but chief among them were Norway and Britain. And it's very, very interesting to look how the two countries differed in their approach. Norway was so smart, and as a consequence now is pretty much the richest country in the world, or one of. It's kind of like top 10 for real countries, like not just little microstates. It's an immensely wealthy country, very, very like we spoke about yesterday, very high human development index and all that, very high life expectancy, blah blah blah. And it's because of the oil. And then you look at Britain, who also had a massive oil bonanza. Look what they did with it. They threw it away. They completely threw it away. They were so dumb, so hopelessly dumb in Britain. And it was like the gift. It was the golden egg. It was a random gift from the heavens. And it's just very interesting to see how two countries can adopt very different approaches, and one of them succeeds, one of them fails terribly. And there's a big lesson there for Canada, I think.
Yeah. So our memes here. I'm going to go quickly because my phone won't stop ringing. Somebody obviously needs to get a hold of me. Pakistani Phil, deported after birth certificate reveals he's from another country.
From Canada.
From Canada, sorry. I'm distracted now. Oh my God, this thing will not stop ringing. Somebody obviously needs to talk to me. So we'll let that go for now. That's our meme for the day. And we'll chat with you tomorrow. And we do thank you for watching Kelowna Now.
We don't just report the news. We live here too. We're your neighbors, bringing you stories that matter to all of us. No government funding, no outside influence. Kelowna Now, local, independent. News
Wow, that
you
was
can
bad.
trust.